this lesson is going to be the first steps that we take using Adobe Photoshop. And what I'd like to do, this is a very simple exercise, but you got to proceed carefully. Photoshop is an image editor and manipulator. It allows you to arrange, layer, combine, blend, what are called bitmap images that are essentially measured in pixel dimensions, measured on the screen in pixel dimensions, and then those images are reported in a print file, in a PDF format, ultimately, at a certain resolution. That is, you choose the optimal number of pixels that you wish the program to report on a printed page, and that normally wants to be at a minimum 300 pixels per physical inch of printed page. A lot of that will sound strange right now, but it will make more sense to you as we go along, as we start using it. So this exercise is the beginning of arranging your winter, spring, summer, and fall material palette. Material and colors palette, right? Paint finishes, materials, floor finishes, wall finishes, built-ins, countertops, etc. So what we're going to do is collect from the internet. There's one source that I want you guys to look at. Eventually, you'll get some training. It's called Material Bank. And I'm going to go to the internet, and everybody, I assume, is expert at using the internet and shopping for things, right? So this is actually a fun exercise. I'm going to ask you to find things on the internet. Many of you have used the internet to find images for your magazine cutout drawing, spatial edge drawing. So if I type in the word wood, right? And I select, all right, allow images, we're gonna get tons of images of wood all over the place. That's one way to find wood images. If I type in marble, get tons of images of marble. They have textures, patterns. Okay, some of the images are going to be higher resolution than others. That is, they're larger images relative to others in terms of pixel dimensions. That is, how much space it occupies on your physical computer screen. What we are doing right now is collecting images irrespective of that, and we're going to examine those images when we bring them into Adobe Photoshop. So first thing I'm going to do is collect in a folder some images. I mentioned Material Bank. Let me go to Material Bank. Let's talk about that a little bit. One of the advantages to going to a site like this, which somehow has has not processed my membership, but whether or not you have an account, you can click on one of these icons, wall covering ceramic wood, and it allows you to navigate over to images of wood, right? And if I click on a selected image that I want here, that I'm interested in, right? With a full membership, I can actually order a sample of this, have it sent to me, have it for a certain amount of time. But the beauty of this also is that I can, having displayed this image, I can right click using my mouse and save that image. So I'm going to save that image. Watch what I do. I've logged into VDI. I'm assuming you guys know how to do all this, right? So I'm going to go over to a documents folder of mine. And create a new folder called Seasons Color Material Palette. Okay, and I'm not going to rename anything. I'm just going to collect my images there. There's one wood image. We go back. There's another wood image, slightly different pattern. Save image as, and it, fortunately, the computer remembers where I've been saving images. I'm just going to collect about a half dozen. Let me go back to materials. Select paint, for example. It is really unlimited, the layers of variety that you can explore in terms of paints and paint finishes. But I'm not, we're not concerning ourselves with that, because you will have a class that deals with materials explicitly. But let me pick some, I'm picking some colors that I like. Sherwin Williams is a save image as. I don't have to do it from this site. I'm showing you one reliable source of material swatches, and largely because Benjamin Moore is also a popular color, largely because many of these images are swatches are similar to others. They're the same size, so they tend to be consistent. Paint swatch. Let's go to some other places. Remember what I looked for. Marble images. 9 out of 10 times leads you to a Pinterest site, which drives me absolutely batty. Anyway, you find something that interests you, click on it. Sometimes when you move the mouse over the image, it reports on the pixel dimensions. That's telling you that that image is 690 by 690 pixels. What does that mean? If I print at 300 pixels, how big is that going to print? Think about that, because that's a question you must be able to answer. If that image were, for instance, instead of 690 by 690 pixels, 600 by 600 pixels, at 300 pixels per inch, that would be 2 inches square. That's a really important property to understand about that image. All right, with a little bit of oh, wait a minute, what's it saving as? I don't know if that's going to work, but that doesn't look like an image format that I know. Save image as JPEG is, so I don't know about that other one, if it worked or not. Related images, 600 by 600. How big is that? That's a 2-inch square, right? Save image as. So right now, in that folder, in my documents, I have a bunch of images. I'm going to go armed with that knowledge that I've made selections about. Let's say I want that to be my spring palette. I'm going to go to Photoshop. Not Suffolk University commencement at Fenway. But I'm going to start Adobe Photoshop. I would recommend, after logging into VDI, place a shortcut to it on your, pin it to the taskbar here. But if you need to find it, you click on the Start menu, and it comes up near the top. It's sorted alphabetically, Adobe being among the first things to get loaded. And you want to start Adobe Photoshop. There's a ton of lessons on LinkedIn learning about Adobe Photoshop and other programs. And what I'm going to do is give you a very abbreviated intro to get you quickly up and running to set up a file with a number of material images, each on a separate layer that you can move around and manipulate in your file. I was tempted to say any questions, but then I realized I'm making a recording, so nobody would probably answer. So Photoshop brings you to this menu, build your skills, what's new on the iPad, what's here, drag and drop an image or select one from your computer. There's no lack of ways to get started. Well, the first thing I want to do is create a new file. So this is called the this is the file menu, and allows me to create a new Photoshop document. And when I select File New, whose shortcut is Control N, that I use very often, Photoshop gives you all this propaganda. Let's start something new. Yeah, good idea. You have these another set of menus here that says recent. If there's any history of something you've done, it's saved here. I don't know whether VDI saves settings for Adobe programs. We'll have to see about that. But so among the selections are web, mobile, which allow you to, program for like a cell phone or something, art and illustration. We're going to select print. All right, because we know about paper. And I'm going to select what I like to use, 11 by 17 at 300 ppi. Now, it's important that you understand what that means. That means 11 inches is tabloid size, 11 inches by 17 inches. That image is telling me it's in what's called a portrait layout, which is vertically oriented. I want it actually in landscape mode, which is horizontally oriented. But it's 11 by 17 inches and 300 pixels in every inch. Right, so that's giving me an idea of the density. So I'm going to select this one, but I'm going to change the orientation. Here to landscape. It doesn't explicitly say landscape, does it? I don't know why it doesn't do that. That would be a useful, meaningful way to describe a horizontal layout. So this is going to create a new blank page for us. Okay. So you get all this default stuff in Photoshop. We will later get into using the toolbar and the tools and manipulating images and stuff like that. This is a much more simple endeavor that we're conducting here. All we're gonna do is bring in and place a bunch of images of materials and finishes, colors. Now, bear with me because every year Photoshop changes. There may be commands that are unfamiliar even to me. I forget how things work. But you basically want to organize your work on layers. Each layer, think of it as a bunch of sheets of trace paper, if you will, sitting on top of other sheets of trace paper, each of which has a unique piece of artwork, right? Layers appear here. Properties, this properties tab is reporting on the dimensions of the image that we're looking at. The width, it's giving me a width in pixels. Because we are starting with 300 pixels per inch, the width of the page, 17 inches, is going to be 17 times 300 pixels, and that's why we have this little box is telling us this page is 5,100 pixels wide, right? Don't get intimidated by all the stuff that appears on the screen. We're only going to use a few functions to bring in images and load them onto layers. How do I do that? I don't want to open them as separate files. What I want to do is place the images. So I can place embedded or place linked. My preference is to place an embedded file. That means that it's going to place the physical artwork into that layer and allow me to manipulate that directly. If I place a linked file, it's linking to an external image, and your composition is subject to the size of that external file. So I'm going to select place embedded, right? And well, it looks like it remembers a ton of stuff I've done before, which is astonishing to me. Those are cloud documents. I'm not looking on the cloud. I want to look on my computer. Click on my computer, right? It brings you back to this menu. It's the Windows folder menu where I can navigate over to my documents, and I go into my seasons material palette. I'm just going to start with the one on top. I haven't given these images meaningful names, so I'm going to click place. Enter. And man, that is huge. I didn't expect it to size up the image to the full size of the page. Nevertheless, you'll notice what happened. It created a separate layer for that image and assigned it the name, the file name. I can manipulate the size of that image and transform it and perform other sorts of distortions that are convenient for me, but I'm not going to do any of that right now. I'm going to continue to bring in images. Enter. There's the wallpaper. It shows up here as a separate layer. So by default, if I select this little icon here, the move tool, by default, when I move my mouse over an image, Photoshop allows me to select it. How cool is that? 1, 2 images. In a matter of 10 minutes, I've created a composition here, right? The exercise is as easy as that. It isn't as simple as, you're going to have to go through the agony of selecting images that you think are appropriate for spring and then persuading the viewer looking at those images that is what we're, that these images are conveying the feeling of spring. That's up to you. And you'll be able to do that by curating this collection intelligently in accordance with that theme. It doesn't have to be winter, spring, summer, fall, right? There's lots of different themes that you could have for organizing materials. I chose that for convenience for the class, but it could, you could certainly have a different thing. You could have a theme that's like wellness or goodness, and have colors that are healing or represent greenery or biology, biophilia, nature, etc. In which case that your composition is going to take a different vector, right? So let's place again embedded. that material. I don't like the idea that by default, Photoshop is making resizing these images. What do I mean by that? Okay. I, I lied to you. We are going to perform a subtle manipulation here. You see these little handles here that I can move over? These handles, when selected, allow me to transform that image. So if by default, it'll resize the image according to a particular scale. This is assigned a ton of pixels to that. But let's just know, for example, that I can bring in an image, and if I want to straight away, I can manipulate its size. So let's bring in some more. Place embedded. I don't want that one that big, so I'm going to make it smaller. Okay, scale is important here. When you're presenting a palette, okay, we're looking at two images of wood, and if that wood is flooring, then that flooring, those segments of flooring actually represent are of a particular size. So if the flooring, if this is wood strip flooring that's 2 1/4 inches wide, and this is wood strip flooring that's 6 inches wide, there ought to be some correspondence in scale between the two images, right? Relative to one another. The marble also represents a particular scale. Here by default, Photoshop, when I move the mouse over an image and down and click on it, it selects that layer. Notice what's happening here. Click, it moves and selects that layer. If I want to change the size of that image, I go Edit, Transform, Scale. And that gives me these handles that are really convenient. Don't remember offhand if holding down the Shift or Control key scales uniformly, that is, both axes in the same direction. Place embedded. There's my blue paint. Let's make that just a little smaller. Move it, enter. What if I don't want my blue paint on top? I can go to that layer from the layer menu and drag it up and down. I can drag it down. Okay, where'd it go? It disappeared. It's behind my orange paint, right? So let's summarize what we've done here. Photoshop, I'm going to start a new file and explain explicitly what it is that you're looking at, and talk a little about this background that's locked here that comes up by default. So when I start a new file in Photoshop, File, New, Custom, it remembers the last thing I drew, the last image size that I used. Create. What have I done? Background. Creates a background layer. You need a background layer. You can duplicate layers. You can copy them, make copies of them, right? If you bring in a drawing of yours, which we'll be doing at some later point in time, you will want to duplicate that layer, because if you do any kind of destructive editing, you want to be able to revert back to your original drawing. So what does Photoshop do when I start? When I start a new document, it creates a background layer. It doesn't currently have any artwork in it. And I haven't showed any of you how to use any of the tools. All I'm doing is the very basic function that Photoshop was designed to perform. That is to arrange and manipulate and modify and combine and layer images. It's an image processing program. So all we're doing, the goal of this class, if you will, is to create 4 files, each one corresponding to your seasonal palette. One of them is going to be named winter, then spring, then summer, then fall. Do them in any order that you want. And how are we composing that? We're bringing in images into Photoshop. Let's take this a little bit further. I'm going to go to my material palette and create a new folder in here within it, and call this winter palette. Right click, new folder, summer palette. What was the one I just made? Well, that was spring, so we'll have to live with that those images are in the root folder. There are other ways of bringing images into Photoshop, right? I can drag from here directly. That's another way to do it. Okay, that's the equivalent. I don't know if that's the equivalent of placing an embedded or linked image. I'm guessing that is an embedded image. It shows simply to undo that. Okay, so we're not getting into, this is a deliberately abbreviated exercise. We're not getting into complex functionality of Photoshop. All we're doing is creating a document that's organizing a bunch of image selections of yours that correspond to your material palette selections, right? Now I'm going to get a little more careful, if you will, with my selection of images. Let's say I'm after a winter palette. What do you think of when you think of a winter palette? Think of cool color. Don't go to Pinterest and say, look up when I first presented this exercise, I didn't know what Pinterest was. When my students told me about it, I discovered, what I thought was an original great idea is all over Pinterest, all 100 times over already. Can anybody think of other palettes that are organized according to winter, spring, summer, or fall, or by seasons? Think about it for a minute. Have you ever been, I was astonished to find this out. I discovered it in Target, but that's not necessarily the place that you could find it. I learned from a Target merchandising display that lipstick is organized by seasons. Why would that be the case? I don't use lipstick very much. In fact, not at all. But I could understand why one would wear different colors of lipstick according to the season. So I'm guessing if you go into like Sephora or Target, as I did, you will find some really interesting arrangements of merchandise according to a color palette that actually corresponds with the season. I'm not going to look for it, and well, maybe I will, but anyway, I'm digressing. What I want to do is now get a more focused response. I'm going to look for a winter palette. I want some cooler colors, right? You haven't taken a lighting class yet, but you will understand that bluer lighting represents what's called cool light, and warm light is represented with a more yellow or in the more yellow orange wavelengths, right? So light that's like 2400 Kelvin or so is in the warm range, where light that's 4000 to 6000 is in the cool range. Anyway, I suppose you could look up cool colors. Warm and cool colors. Okay, so this is somewhat, well, the internet is a perfect, what do you call it, confirmation bias. You look for something and it'll find evidence. But this image is a good example of the difference between warm and cool, right? On the left, you have earth tones, yellows, reddish tone, and on the right, you have the cooler colors, the blues. Let me go back to material bank. Look at this. They have brand spotlights. It looks like they have what's already a collection of materials into these palettes. These are pretty cool. Like, now you're looking at this, right? You're looking at an image like that, inspirational palette, and you're looking at that, and I hope that you're able to look at that and say, you know what? I learned just now how to make that. I know how to do that. How do I do something like that? Well, make Photoshop a little bit smaller here and put these pages side by side, mining inspiration, right? There's one layer of stuff on top of another. If I don't want this learn menu to appear, I think I can make it disappear by clicking collapse to icons. Okay, that sort of abbreviates everything, but no matter. I'm going to go back here. How different is the composition that I have here? What have they done? They have as background some kind of base color. Then they have stuff on top and they have stuff on top of that, and then more stuff on top of that, right? That's on a different layer. So I can take that layer and put it on top if I want that on top. If I want it on the very top, I can move that layer up. You see what I'm doing here? Now I'm going to save this file on my computer in my documents, my first palette. Okay. Now, if you guys can follow the steps that I did, everything that I've done here, you can replicate that which is being displayed on the material bank and then some. In the next lesson, I'll show you how to enhance that presentation a bit with some kind of annotations like text, labels, other stuff that you can do. But for the most part, what I've done in this last few minutes, I hope, gives you enough knowledge to be able to arrange your 4 different palettes and at least have a first draft in place by the end of the class. Good luck, and call or write with questions.